Hi, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from YourBlackWorld.com, and today I heard some interesting information. I heard that there was allegedly an assassination attempt on Secretary of State Hillary Clinton during a recent trip to Israel. Now, the reason you haven't heard about this, some might say, is because the incident has been sort of blocked out of American media. What's also interesting is that this week there was also an unfortunate terrorist attack in Bulgaria, in which some Israelis were killed on a bus, and the Israeli government is justifiably outraged about what happened. And some are even saying that there's a connection between the assassination attempt and this bombing of Bulgaria. So to try to understand some of this, I brought in my favorite political science expert, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Dr. Leon is a professor in political science at Howard University. I consider him to be one of the most knowledgeable political scientists in the country, and he can really help us get to the bottom of this. He's also the host of Inside the Issues with Wilmer Leon, which comes on SiriusXM The Power, channel 128 on Saturdays from 11 to 2. How are you doing today, Dr. Leon?
I am doing great. My brother, and you seem to be doing well as usual.
Oh, I'm always doing well, man. The way I see it is, especially with this stuff going on in Colorado, man, when you've got another day on this earth,
right,
then you're doing pretty good. And I want to give my condolences to the families that are affected by this tragedy. It's so unfortunate. Now, Dr. Leon, you came to me with this situation about Hillary Clinton and the assassination and what was going on in Bulgaria, and I was absolutely intrigued by this. So I would love for you to sort of explain, what the scenario is and give us your interpretation of it.
Okay, well, I think a couple of things are important to kind of level set this. One is that some watching this may wind up saying that, here we go with conspiracy theory. And this is not conspiracy theory. This is more of just connecting dots of facts that we know. And so one fact that we know is that Israel right now is in an incredible conflict with Iran, and that Israel has threatened to attack Iran, and we also know that Israel is trying to...
Oh, by the way, Dr. Leon, it's okay to answer the phone if you have to.
Well, we'll let it go.
Okay.
We know that Israel is doing everything in its power to get U.S. support to attack Israel. Okay, so I'm sorry. Israel is doing everything in its power to get U.S. support to attack Iran. So we know that. Now, it's very interesting that recently Minnesota Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann and a number of her other conservative cohorts have been sending letters to various security agencies saying that there are Muslim spies that have infiltrated the United States government. One of which she has come out to say that Hillary, and this is how it all ties together, Hillary Clinton's advisor or assistant, Uma Abedin, who is the wife of former New York Congressman Anthony Weiner, has ties to the Muslim Brotherhood and is a spy for the Muslim Brotherhood.
Okay.
Michelle Bachmann has come out and in writing has made that accusation. Unfounded. In fact, CNN has reported on this, and Anderson Cooper has come out and basically debunked this entire story, but Michelle Bachmann and some of her other cronies are carrying this forward. So we start there, okay? From there we go to the bombing of the bus in Bulgaria. And one of the things that I found, and it was a busload of Israeli tourists who were on holiday in Bulgaria, and allegedly a Hamas operative, terrorist, suicide bomber, gets on the bus, explodes the bomb, kills a number of people on the bus. But what got my interest there was when you read the accounts of the incident, all of the data comes from Israel. It is Defense Minister Ehud Barak is saying it's Hamas. Israeli Prime Minister I just forgot the guy's name. Anyway, Netanyahu is claiming Hamas and that it's backed by Iran. All of the data that is being put out on that attack is coming from Israel. And I just found that to be very, very interesting, that there are no other security entities, no other police forces that are commenting on this. All of the data is coming from Israel. And we do know, it is reported, that there are Israeli Mossad agents that are operating in Bulgaria. So from there we go to a story that is attributed to a couple sources. One is znews.com. Another is newstrackindia.com. And they make it out to be an ANI story. And then we also have, apparently it's a Reuters story as well. And it's also coming from Iran's Al-Alam News that Secretary of State Clinton's convoy, while in traveling, I think, through Jerusalem, was fired upon in an assassination attempt of Secretary of State Clinton. And that has not been reported in mainstream U.S. media. And what many are now saying, and this is the entire point of connecting all of these dots, is that the attack in Bulgaria was not a Hamas-backed Iranian attack. It was what they call a false flag operation, wherein Israeli Mossad agents actually were involved in blowing up the bus and are trying to blame Iran for doing this. And that they also then fired upon Secretary of State Clinton's convoy and blaming it on Iran as an attempt to create an environment where their attack of Iran would then be supported. Very similar to former Vice President Cheney and former President George Bush talking about Iraq trying to buy yellow cake uranium, and there are weapons of mass destruction. All of that to create an environment where it then becomes supportable to attack Iraq.
Okay, so I have a question, Dr. Leon. I want to know, why is it that that they would not want the American public to know about the assassination attempt on Hillary Clinton? Well, how does that tie? How does that that screening of information play into this whole idea of creating the false flag?
Your question, if I understand your question, why is it that mainstream U.S. media is not reporting the story?
Well, yeah, why are they not reporting the assassination attempt? Yeah.
It could. I don't know the answer to that question. So my supposition is that the false flag operation, now that it is being identified as such, that all of this may now actually be backfiring on Israel, maybe backfiring on the Mossad, and that if they were to run that story in mainstream media, it would quickly come out that this was a trick shot, that this was not really Hamas/Iran backed attempt, that it was actually a false move, and that Israel was involved in it. That's the only thing I can figure. That by reporting it, by more people talking about it, that they would actually pull the covers off of it, and Israel would be found to actually be the root cause of this problem. Now, and also let me just quickly say, to those who are going to jump on this and say, oh, here these guys go being anti-Semitic, and this has nothing to do with anything about anti-Semitism. This is about looking at news stories, connecting dots, and asking very simple questions about who was involved.
Okay, and I agree with you. I agree. I mean, I think you're always in a bad situation when the truth becomes the enemy, when questions are not supposed to be answered. And so I guess my question is, I'm still working to make that connection between this assassination attempt in Israel and everything else. And so I'm curious as to whether or not, has there been any indication on who tried to kill Secretary Clinton? I mean, has anybody reported on that? So they never said who.
No. Well, according to, now here's another important thing, is that from all of the press that I've read on this issue, the story was reported one time on Israeli radio, and then the story has not been reported since. And but it was interesting that the story has traveled across the Middle East and the story has traveled across Europe, but it just hasn't made its way here. And there are a lot of instances where, there are things that happen in the world and people in the United States never get wind of it. That's why I tell my students all the time, you got to read foreign media. You've got to look at foreign press if you want to get a better holistic understanding of what's going on in the world and why. You can't just look at the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. You've got to look at Al Haratz in Israel. You've got to look at Agence France Presse. You've got to look at Der Spiegel in Germany. There are a number of other papers that you've got to go to if you want to get a better, clearer understanding, particularly in terms of international stuff, of what's happening in the world. So I don't have an answer to that question. I don't have an answer to your question. I just find it very interesting that Congresswoman, I forgot the woman's name, from Minnesota, Bachmann makes this claim against Uma Abedin, who works for Hillary Clinton, claiming that she's a agent for the Muslim Brotherhood, who, of course, is now in power in Egypt. Then you have this bus blow up in Bulgaria, and it's only Israeli sources that are being quoted and blaming Hamas. And then you have this alleged shooting at Secretary of State Clinton's convoy in Israel, and again they blame Hamas. It's interesting to say the least.
Well, it is interesting. I'm looking here on the site Z News, znews.india.com, and you mentioned that site earlier, and I know one thing that they're saying here is that that there's a speculation that the attack on Hillary was related to the current political upheaval in Israel, the aim being to, quote unquote, kill Hillary, blame Iran, and take the focus off the domestic policy meltdown in Tel Aviv. And, that's very interesting.
Hence the false flag operation.
Well, I think that you make a very strong point about the importance of observing international news. I can tell you, I remember when I was in Germany for 6 weeks back in 2006, and I was doing a visit with the Center for European Economic Research in Mannheim, Germany. And I remember watching CNN internationally was very different from watching CNN domestically. You didn't see any of that silliness with, Paris Hilton and all that other stuff. You saw news that assumed that you were intelligent and that you wanted to know what was going on in the world. What was also interesting was this. There was extensive coverage of the war that summer, in which the Israelis were literally just pounding on the Palestinians. Bam, bam, bam. I mean, I think they kidnapped three Israeli soldiers, and the Palestinians killed. I mean, the Israelis killed hundreds, maybe even more than 1,000 Palestinians over the kidnapping of 3 Israeli soldiers. And I remember watching this and saying, "What in the hell is going on here?" I mean, this is apartheid Jim Crow 101. So you're telling me that you can kill 1,000 people over 3 that they took from you? Are you serious? And so that's when I became, or I'd already kind of been aware of this, but I became keenly aware of 2 things. One, the disparity between the news that's fed to us here in the U.S., the propaganda, and what's really going on. And then 2, the lack of value people place on Palestinian life. President Jimmy Carter is absolutely correct when he's going around the country saying that this apartheid going on with the Palestinians and Israelis is simply unacceptable. And you can't hide behind allegations of anti-Semitism to protect you from the fact that some would argue that the Israeli government, they act almost like little spoiled children who go around terrorizing everybody in their neighborhood because they've got this massive U.S. backing, allowing them to have the best of weapons and unconditional support. I don't care. It's just like when we talk about Obama. Nobody gets unconditional support. Nobody should get unconditional support. I don't believe this idea that we say, oh, we back Israel all the time, no matter what they do. No, if Israel's wrong, we should not be backing them. And I think that's something that people tend to forget when it comes to all this silliness going on. So I'm really grateful to you for bringing this to my attention and helping us understand it. I'll let you get the last word. Do you have any other thoughts on it?
Well, to your point about referring to Israel's response to the Palestinians as apartheid, former Anglican Archbishop Desmond Tutu said that. He said that very thing. So if former Anglican Archbishop Desmond Tutu can come up with that analysis, and he knows a little bit more about apartheid than you and I do, my money's on him. Also, former South African President Nelson Mandela made the statement that the United States is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. I believe that was a Newsweek magazine story. In fact, I said that I was on a program, a local news program, and I made that comment, and the commentator said to me, Wilmer, where'd you get that from? I said, I got it from former South African President Nelson Mandela. It's a Newsweek story. He said, Nelson Mandela? Nelson Mandela isn't even an American. Where are you quoting him? Anyway.
Sometimes if you really want to understand America, the worst thing you can do is to ask an American to explain it to you. Wow.
So, but all of that to say, you're absolutely right.
Wow. Well, thank you very much for your time on this, my friend. I truly appreciate it. And thank you all for checking us out at yourblackworld.com. And this is Dr. Wilmer Leon. He's the host of Inside the Issues with Wilmer Leon that comes on Sirius XM The Power, channel 128 on Saturdays from 11 to 2. His Facebook page is facebook.com/Dr. Leon's Prescription. And he is a professor of political science at Howard University and just a bad, brilliant brother, and that's why I love to talk to him. So you take care, Wilmer, and thank you all for checking us out. All right.
Appreciate it.
Until we meet again, stay strong, be blessed, and be educated. We are gone. Peace.